In Budapest, my uncle told me, don't worry, I'm going to have to take you to a jail. He had to take us into a jail so that he can make us legalize us, because we were underage, we were minors, and he would vouch to be our guardian. To do that, we had to go into jail, go through a process, paperwork, take pictures, and then come out on the other side with a permit where my uncle is the guardian for those two youngsters, and I have the right then, with legalized papers, to go to wherever I want in Hungary. We went to our sister Lola, and we stayed there for a while. But that very same night, we took a train, we went going to Munkács, where my sister Goldie and my grandparents, my cousins, my uncles, everybody lived there. It took about 7 or 8 hours. Next morning we arrived into Munkács. You can just imagine the reunion with my sister, Goldie. It was unbelievable.
How do you spell that town?
Goldie?
No, Munkács.
Munkács is the same. M-U-N-C-A, I think C-S,
okay.
C-S ending. In my book it's written completely. And I want you all to know, whoever is listening to my stories, that I wrote a book that has all these details, plus all the details about my sister Lola, how she survived and everything. So there are in fact 2 books. She wrote a great book too. But if you check my website, on my website you're going to see, on the Zachor Holocaust Remembrance Foundation website, you're going to see all about her book, and eventually, when my book is ready, also about my book.
Okay.
Now we're in Munkács, and the whole family is reunited. They put me and my little brother with one uncle, who had also 2 sons and a daughter. Anyway, he had a store where he was selling yardage goods for dresses and clothing and suits and so on. He did pretty good business. And above the store was his house. So below, at the street level, was his store. And we were assigned to stay there with this uncle. Life in Munkács was unbelievable. Like nothing ever happened. People were going to school, kids my age are going to school, they were going to proms, they're going to theaters, they're going to bar mitzvahs and to weddings and to shows, and it's unbelievable, like life was going on, like normal. And when I told them what's happening in Poland, some of them believe it, but most of them said, well, this will never happen in Hungary. The same thing like the German Jews said, they're Germans, it will never happen in Germany or in Poland.
So this was what year?
This was in 1943.
Yeah.
This would never happen in Hungary. But some people believed what happened in Poland, but it never happened there. And I'm with my uncle. I begged my uncle, I says, look, if something should ever happen here, all of those assets that you have, the store, the yardage good, and everything else, is all going to be confiscated. If you can take some of your assets and convert them to something tangible, something that you can put in your pocket or sew it into your clothing, you can take it with you or whatever. It made sense to him. And he listened to us. One day, he came home with a box full of shoes, brand new shoes, and he gave every member of the family, including myself, my little brother, a pair of these beautiful black shoes, and he told us that in the heel of the shoes there are diamonds. Just in case of a dire emergency, you should know this could be a life-saving item for you. You have some diamonds in the heels of these shoes. Well, life was going on pretty normal, but meanwhile, my father and my mother were supposed to arrive, and they didn't show. They were supposed to arrive like a few days later. 1 week went by, a month went by, 2 months went by, 3 months went by. We don't hear a word from my parents, my mother and father. One day, somebody from Bochnia came across, smuggled across, and he knew my parents. And he told us what happened. When the truck pulled in the barn and everybody climbed into the truck at night, the morning it was supposed to leave, a farmer, a neighbor across the street, saw that something was going on fishy. He called the SS, the police, and he told them about it. So they arrived and they pulled everybody out of the truck. This is one of the pictures.
Let's see. Let's see if I can see that. Let me just hold it there for a minute. Yeah, hold it. Okay, I got it.
Yeah. They pulled everyone out of the truck, lined them up, and shot everyone on the spot, including the driver, who wasn't Jewish.
Oh.
All 11 people were shot on the spot.
And the farmer that told on them was
probably rewarded, paid. Imagine. Now, the police, the Nazis brought along capos from the ghetto with help to bury those people because they expected that's what they'll do, and that they needed someone to take these bodies to the cemetery and bury them. So one of the capos was that capo that was with Lola in the same office, that he went with Lola back and forth from the ghetto to see Schoenberg.
Yeah.
That same capo, he was a very nice man. He was there to take these bodies and bury them. And he knew these bodies, he knew my parents, and he knew most of those people. So he made sure he buried them in a mass grave, all 11 of them, including the driver, in a mass grave, and he wrote down a little note for himself who is in that grave. He survived the war. And after the war, he looked up my sister Lola and Michael, who also survived, and he told them exactly where he buried them. And we went ahead and we put up a monument, a beautiful monument. I'll show it to you. I have a picture of it with all the names of every person, a huge, big monument, the names of every person around it. Anyway, this is another part of the story. But this is what happened to our parents. We found out they did not survive. And life is going on in Hungary as normal till one day in March of 1944, the Germans marched right into Hungary. Now, there was no fighting. They just came right in. And they occupied the whole country of Hungary. Now the question is why? In that time, in March of 1944, Hitler already knew that he was losing the war. Why would he siphon off soldiers from the front to occupy a friendly country? It didn't make any sense, except for one thing. He had this obsession. He wanted to kill as many Jews as possible. Hungary had about 750,000 Jewish inhabitants. So going after the Jews to him was more important than winning the war, obviously, at that point. He was a fanatic madman. But this time, they came into Hungary. They were so organized, so disciplined, and that it's almost like they had it pre-rehearsed. Within 3 weeks' time, every Jewish community was in a ghetto. Every Jewish person within 3 weeks' time had a Star of David or a Star of David on his chest. There was no traveling anymore. You were not allowed to work for Gentiles. Everything stopped. Businesses were confiscated. Everything happened in 3 weeks' time. So they came in prepared, and it looks like the Hungarian gendarmes were helping them out. It's like it was pre-rehearsed. They knew exactly every step that they were to do. And apparently, they even had help from a friendly country. I hate to say that, because they were able, through computers that they obtained from other countries, to find out exactly where every Jewish person lived in that country.
I think Eichmann knew and found out. The very number.
They had the number, they had the place, they had the person, they had every age of every person, the place where you lived. They knew everything. So it's just rounding them up. So, I don't want to mention the names, but there was a computerized process that gave him all this information. And you can imagine who it was.
Right.
So here, in 3 weeks' time, we get orders that everyone is going to be relocated into Germany. You're going to go to a labor camp. You're going to work in this camp, but you're going to live with your family, your whole family. Those capable of work will be working. The rest of them will go to school, and everything will be fine. And they are asking everybody, in fact, they're ordering us to take along all your valuables that you can carry, because you will need it, to survive. To make a long story short, that one day they told us to everybody to be in the front of the building at such and such time, to be ready to march with all your bundles and all your valuables. And we are all together there, and we're starting to march into town. In the middle of the town, not too far from the railroad station, they had a brick factory. And everybody was brought into this brick factory in Munkacs, in that town, all the Jewish people, the brick factory. In that factory, they had, why the factory? Because they had railroad sidings there, and they had cattle cars waiting for us, all lined up, waiting for us. They divided us 80 per cattle car, and they lined us up to each cattle car 80, and so on. I'm there with my uncle, my aunts, and my cousins. One cousin, I think he was out of town, but one of his sons, he was with us, and my sister, my little brother, Tuli. All of a sudden, while we're standing there, we see two men walking down with a stretcher, and they brought a person, and it looked like a woman, right to us. They put her down near us. It's my sister Goldie. Her face was all bloody black and blue. I says, Goldie, what happened to you? She says she tried to escape. She went as far as the railroad station, when a Hungarian gendarme recognized her, because she was very well known in Munkacs. She was the sweetheart of that town. She was so loving. Everybody knew Lola, Goldie rather. And so he recognized her, and he caught her, and he gave her over to the Nazis, and they beat her up like a pulp. And they brought her here on a stretcher. A few minutes later, they told us all to go in. And with our help, we got her into the railroad car. That cattle car, 80 people, was pretty tight. It wouldn't be so bad, 80 people, but everybody had those bundles and valises and packages with them, and made it so tight that if you wanted to sit down, someone else had to stand up. There was no room. So here we are, the doors get shut, and we're entombed in this cattle car. We don't know where we're going, and the train starts to move. 1 day, 2 days, all we had inside the cattle car was 2 buckets full of water. Once the water was gone, there were no sanitary facilities. All we had was 2 buckets. Well, at first, you know, people were modest. We would take a blanket and sort of hold while somebody uses it. Modesty went out the window because pretty soon these buckets got filled up. 80 people with 2 buckets? If you can imagine what was going on. We don't know how far we're going. Food was no problem because everybody took along, cooked and things. The food was all right. But no sanitary conditions. And after a while, these buckets got filled up and they would spill over. And we were sitting in all this mess and the feces and the smell. If you can picture this, there were women with children, pregnant women, older people, sick people, babies. All the screaming and crying was going on for 3 days. 3 days, and on the 3rd night, we arrived at a place I'll never forget. A place, and the train didn't stop, but we see a railroad station, and it flickered right by, and we could read it from that little window that some people were trying to catch some fresh air there. We can see it says Oświęcim. Oświęcim is Polish for Auschwitz. We didn't know. I never heard of an Auschwitz or an Oświęcim. We never knew about that. But then later we found out. But the train did not stop in Oświęcim. It just kept going till it arrived at a place, and we stopped. Now we stopped, and we see through that window a gate, and on the gate it says, Arbeit macht frei. Labor gives you freedom, makes you free. That was Auschwitz. We didn't know what that was, but we figured, well, we're going to a labor camp. Makes sense. Arbeit macht frei. It makes sense. This is probably we're going to be encamped. The train stood there about an hour, and then afterwards it started to move again. And it moved for a couple more miles. It was still nighttime, and it arrived at a place, we didn't know the name of it, but that was Birkenau. Birkenau was part of Auschwitz. But Birkenau was the place where they had all the crematoriums and all of the gas chambers. That was the place where all the selection is being done and all that. And people looked out through that little window and they said, well, this looks like barracks there. Maybe this is the camp we're going to stay. When all of a sudden, all hell broke loose. They opened the door, and it was real pandemonium. They had the Nazi SS men beating us with batons and yelling at us, raus, raus, schnell. And they also had inmates with the striped concentration camp clothes who were part of the Sonderkommando. They were under orders from the Nazis what to do. And they were yelling at us at all different languages, Hungarian, Yiddish, Polish, Czech, all these different. Raus, schnell, get out of there, leave all your belongings where it is. Don't you touch any of your packages. Leave it right on the spot. Women and children to the right and man to the left. Well, I'm holding on to my sister Goldie and my little brother Tuli when we're being just pulled apart, never to see each other again. That was it. We had no idea where we were, but we figured this is probably a place where we're going to work. And I went with the man. I wasn't quite a child anymore, and I wasn't a man either. I was about 15 and a half years of age at that point. And I wasn't very tall. But I figured if it's a labor camp, they'll treat you better if you can labor, if you can work. I decided to go with. We're standing in line and inching forward when I see at the head of the line there's a man in a white frock like a doctor wearing white gloves, and he's going like this, right, left, right, left, right, left. That was selection. We didn't know what he was doing, and we didn't know who he was, but it looked like a doctor. So as I came closer, I spoke German. As I came closer, my uncle was behind me, my cousin behind him, and I heard him ask questions. He was asking one man, a young man, a question. He says, that poor soul, not knowing better, says that he had knee problems. They send him to the right. That meant certain death. He would rather go by truck than run 5 kilometers. That was just an excuse. Nobody was to run anything. He wanted to select who is strong and who is weak. So when I came closer, I told my uncle, my cousin, whatever he is asking you, take the hard part. Don't take the easy part. And I came up in front of him, and before he even had a chance to ask, I stretched myself out and I saluted him. I said to him, 18 Jahre alt, gesund und arbeitsfähig. I'm 18 years old, I'm healthy, and I'm capable to work, able to work. So he says to me, can you run 5 kilometers in German? I said, jawohl, yes. He sent me to the left. My uncle and my cousin followed me. They all went to the left. Later on, I found out who this doctor was. That was Dr. Mengele. I guess you heard probably of him. He was the angel of death. He had decided who shall live, who shall die, simply by a flick of his finger. Imagine. And he is the one who did all these experiments with children and twins. Yeah. Unbelievable. So now we're in line. They're taking us someplace. And while we're walking in this line, we see these huge chimneys with stacks, tall stacks on these chimneys, and flames shooting out over them, maybe 5 or 10 feet above those tall chimneys, flames shooting out. And ashes are flying all over the place like an eruption of a volcano. You know, every time you make a step, the ground was white with like snow. You have a footprint on the ashes. And the stench, the smell was so awful. We couldn't figure out what it was. But some of the men in line were saying these are probably smelting factories. And this is probably where we will be working, in those smelting factories. No one could imagine of anything else. We're continuing, going online.
Wow. So at that time you didn't know what was going on in Birkenau and in Auschwitz?
No one knew. No one knew. who could imagine something like that? So now we're coming into this huge room. It was about almost like a stadium. And they order us through loudspeakers to get undressed and get completely out of your shoes, your clothing, and leave everything where you get undressed, leave it, step out of your shoes, and go over to that line of barbers. They had a whole line of people with clippers in their hand. And now they were clipping the hair all over your body. And from there, you're going to go into the showers. Now, remember, my uncle gave me a pair of shoes, beautiful black shoes, and I had diamonds in it. This is the uncle who was next to me and his son. They also had these shoes. They stepped out of the shoes, but I refused to get out of the shoes. I got all undressed. If you can picture this, I'm completely naked with beautiful black shoes. And I'm walking up to these barbers. They cut my hair all over the body. But no one said a word about my shoes. They didn't say anything. Then I go into the shower. It was a huge room with spigots all over and the showers all over. Everybody got the shower at the same time. And I'm still with my shoes. From there, they gave it in a place where we took a towel, we could dry off. And then another place, they handed us a bundle of clothes, striped concentration camp clothes. And in those clothes, there was a pair of shoes, wooden cloths, but it had canvas on top. So I got dressed, and I got dressed in those shoes, and I put those black shoes under my arm, under my jacket. And anyway, we walked out of there. Before we got dressed there, before they gave us the clothes, they all puffed some DDT all over our body, you know, with a certain pump. They pumped powder, Dilausung they call it. And then we got dressed, and now we're going to the barracks. We're on our way to the barracks. Nobody knows anything yet. We arrive at the barracks. There was a Stubenälteste. There was a Polish man waiting, an inmate. His job was to take care of that barrack. That was his job, to keep order inside that barrack. So he is welcoming us, some welcoming party. He's speaking to us in his broken German, okay? And he says, "You Hungarian Jews, you think you're here on a vacation? Think again. You see those chimneys, those ashes? Those are your mothers, your fathers, your brothers, and your sisters." He says, "And if you don't behave and do exactly the way you're told, this is exactly where you're going to wind up. Ashes." Well, we couldn't believe what we just heard. Is that possible? What is that? A factory of death? Industrializing death? What is this? It just didn't penetrate our mind. Couldn't believe that cultured, civilized people in the 20th century were doing things like that? You mean my brother, my sister? Ashes? We just couldn't get over this. We were so shocked. So he's telling us to go into this barrack and pick out any one of the bunks you want to sleep. It was late at night, and we were so bushed. Because in that train ride, 3 nights, we didn't sleep. Who could sleep with the screaming and yelling and the smell? I mean, we couldn't keep our eyes open anymore. We found a bunk. It's a 3-layer bunk. We took the top bunk, my cousin, my uncle, and I. We lay down, and we were out of it. We fell asleep. In the middle of the night, I hear screams. So I woke up, Now, I knew the Stubmeltester, the man in charge of the barrack, spoke Polish. He was Polish. Now, I spoke Polish. So I walk over to him and I said, what is going on here? Because I hear cries, screaming, a muffled scream, not too close. And I see through the cracks of the wall, there is an orange hue like a fire, not too far away, a couple 100 yards away from our barrack. It's like orange. So I says, what is going on here? I said, you Hungarian Jews. They were waiting for you. For months now, they were preparing for the influx of the Hungarian Jews. They were preparing before Hungary was even occupied. They were making room for this tremendous influx of 700,000 Jews coming from Hungary. They had to have, he says, they have to process between 12 and 15,000 per day. By processing, he didn't mean 12 or 15,000 barrels of beer.
He wasn't talking about paperwork.
They had to kill, murder, 12 to 15,000 per day. They had a quota, which they had to meet that quota because these trains were coming in fast and furious, those new transports.